The chandelier glare caught the room as her words cut me out in front of everyone. I'm Vaughn Mercer, 54, a logistics officer. The leather folder pressed under my arm felt heavier than any silence I carried. Yet, what do you do when family decides you don't belong? The clinking of silverware stopped when Lindsay's voice cut across the table. You don't belong here. The chandeliers above spilled fractured light over plates of turkey and polished glasses. Rosemary and butter floated in the air, but the taste in my mouth turned dry. I tightened my grip on the leather folder resting against my thigh, its edge leaving a faint groove in my palm. One thing, I could still keep steady. Ethan lowered his gaze to the candle in front of him, flame wobbling like an alibi too thin to hold. Relatives shifted, studying napkins and water glasses as if shame could be escaped by looking down. A cough, the scrape of a chair leg, and then quiet. Even the music piped in from the corner stuttered into nothing. I'm sorry you feel that way. I managed tone flat as a file drawer. The words were all I could put down without breaking rank. Lindsay smiled without warmth. It's nothing personal, she said, offering the kind of cruelty that comes wrapped in etiquette. The folder on my leg held receipts and contracts with my name signed clean across them, proof of what I'd given. I could have opened it right there, spread the evidence across the table like playing cards. Instead, I let it sit closed. This room wasn't ready for proof. It had already chosen silence. General Davis, 2 seats away, kept his spine straight. He didn't speak, jaw-locked eyes steady. Light caught the silver in his hair. Our glances crossed for half a second, long enough to know he had seen short enough to confirm he wouldn't intervene. Someone murmured, "Let's not make a scene. Families prefer tidiness even when the mess is human." I watched my mother's hand tremble as she lifted her glass. The ice chimed softly against the rim. She didn't look my way. No one did. Erasure doesn't require shouting. Sometimes it's only the absence of a name. I stood chair legs sighing across the polished floor. The folder came with me, dark against my suit, its weight the only applause I was going to get. Lindsay lifted her glass higher. To family, she said, and the toast carried around the table without pause. I walked past the sideboard, straightening a crooked stack of plates as I went. Habit. Find the line square the corner. A pointless order in a room already set against me, but one I could control. At the doorway, I looked back once. The table had closed over my empty chair, as quickly as water swallowing a stone. The hallway smelled of polish and cold air leaking in through the vestibule. My reflection stretched along the paneled wall as I crossed to the exit shoes soft on carpet. The maitre d' glanced up but wisely kept his eyes lowered. The glass doors opened with a hush. Outside, night air wrapped me in clean cold. Breath streamed white from my mouth. In the parking lot, lights hummed and moths battered themselves against bulbs they couldn't enter. I set the folder under my arm and rubbed the pink line it had pressed into my hand. The sting felt honest, something earned, not given. Inside, voices rose again, a toast lost to the doors. I didn't look back. I adjusted my shoulders, listened to the faint horn of a train somewhere beyond the river, and stepped into the dark. My shoes cracking steady across the concrete. The folder stayed tight against my ribs, a shadow that carried weight. Not pity. Whatever they thought they'd erased tonight, I knew better. Some absences are only beginnings. The phone lit up against the chipped counter, Ethan's name across the screen. I pressed accept and heard him draw a breath before speaking. "Don't take it personally," he said, voice low, rehearsed. My apartment fridge rattled in the background like it wanted to argue for me. I leaned against the counter coffee cooling in the mug I hadn't washed from yesterday. The bitter edge of it clung to the air. "Not personal," I repeated. The words felt like a misprint. Before he could answer, my phone buzzed again, this time with the group chat. A picture flashed my own chair at the banquet table, empty. Someone had drawn a cartoon bubble over it that read, "Reserved for nobody." Laughter stacked up in the comments below. My thumb hovered, but didn't scroll. "People are stressed," Ethan went on. His voice filled with that tired reason families use when they want to excuse the inexcusable. "It's her wedding. You should just let it go." I turned toward the small kitchen window. Outside, street lamps glowed in mist, the same pale orange that clung to Richmond in late autumn. The reflection in the glass caught me the tired slope of my shoulders. The folder propped against the wall behind me, silent waiting. "Let it go," I repeated softer. The words tasted like oversteeped tea, bitter and thin. The chat buzzed again. This time it was a short clip, a meme with canned laughter me caught mid-blink at the rehearsal dinner captioned, "Awkward uncle energy." I wasn't their uncle, but accuracy wasn't the point. I could hear their real laughter echoing behind the digital version. "Ethan," I said, "you know what I paid for?" Silence on the line. I pictured him pressing his forehead into his palm the way he used to before exams, when he hoped someone else would carry the weight. "It's not about money," he muttered finally. "It's about keeping peace. Keeping peace." I looked at the mug on the counter, ringed brown at the edges, the kind of stain that didn't wash out easily. Maybe he believed it. Maybe he just needed to. Either way, it left me standing on the far side of the line again. Another buzz. Instagram this time. Lindsay's profile, a glossy photo of her, and a college friend arms, looped glasses raised. Caption: "Couldn't imagine this day without my maid of honor." The screen light washed my small kitchen in blue. My thumb trembled just once before I set the phone face down. The hum of the fridge pressed steady like a clock counting something I hadn't named yet. I opened the laptop on the table screen, reflecting my face in the black before it came alive. The camera dot glowed faintly, catching the tired hollows under my eyes. Behind me in the reflection, the folder. I could almost believe it was staring back. In that dim light, surrounded by glow and static, I understood something simple. They weren't overlooking me by accident. They were editing me out on purpose, cropping the picture until I was a ghost. The fridge clicked off. The room fell quiet enough to hear my breath. Silence. I whispered to the dark glass can cut sharper than words. Her grip caught me before the weight could. Julia's handshake was as steady as it had been 20 years earlier, when desert sand and convoy engines framed our world. "You're not alone in this," she said, and for a moment the din in my head went quiet enough to hear the flag rope clinking against the pole outside. The veterans' hall smelled the same as always, wax on wood floors, brass polish that clung to the old display case. A pot of coffee burbled in the corner, sending out a bitter, burnt-sweet scent that never seemed to change. I looked around at the few men and women scattered across folding chairs, jackets half-zipped, voices low. Richmond winters have a way of pressing into bones, and everyone there wore it like a second coat. Julia studied me with eyes that hadn't dulled sharp, but not unkind. "I heard what happened," she said simply. No judgment, no pity, just the weight of fact. I nodded. The folder at my side thumped lightly as I set it down on the chair, leather creaking. They're pretending it didn't happen, I admitted. Or worse, pretending it was deserved. My words drifted up toward the dusty ceiling fans, then back down heavier. Julia leaned in elbows on her knees. "Don't let silence bury you twice," she said, the warning carrying more grit than comfort. She reached into her jacket pocket and drew out something small worn. The metallic clink as it hit my palm pulled me backward in time, a dog tag scarred but legible twin to one I'd carried in Afghanistan. The chain was cool at first, then warmed quickly against my skin. "Keep it," she told me. "It's not for memory. It's for belonging." I closed my fingers around it. The ridges pressed a map into my hand, each letter cut deep enough to outlast forgetting. For a second, the hall around me faded, and I was back in dust, listening to the crack of distant fire, and Julia's voice shouting through it. She had pulled me forward once. She was doing it again. "Lindsay isn't going to stop," Julia said, steady. "This isn't an oversight. It's deliberate." The word deliberate landed heavier than anger. She watched my face as though measuring how much weight I could carry. "You need to be ready. Not with shouting, but with proof." The coffee machine gave a final hiss and clicked off. Someone in the back rows poured themselves a cup, and the smell drifted over a reminder of cold mornings before patrol bitter liquid that steadied nerves. Julia tapped the folder with a fingertip. "That thing isn't just paper. It's leverage. Don't let it sit idle." I followed her gaze to the worn leather edges slightly frayed from travel. The image of it splitting open, spilling contracts and receipts came to me like a warning and a promise at once. "You know me," I said. "I don't start fights." Julia shook her head a quick motion. "This isn't starting. It's finishing." Her words carried the same rhythm as orders once given over static. I nodded slowly. The hum of the overhead lights buzzed in counterpoint to the pulse in my wrist. I slipped the tag into my pocket, feeling its shape settle next to my keys. A second weight, a different kind of evidence. My eyes drifted back to the folder, its spine worn its clasp holding for now. The veterans around us laughed at something on a phone, their voices rising and falling like waves on a shore I hadn't touched in years. For the first time since the dinner, I felt a handhold in the climb back up. I stood to leave, dog tag pressed against me, folder under my arm. At the door, I glanced down at the leather case and then back at Julia. She gave a short nod, as if to say the next move was mine. Ideas were already forming thin outlines at first, then sharpening. Silence had served me long enough. It was time to start planning what it might undo. The room smelled of wet wool coats and carpet that had seen too many storms. Rain tapped against the tall windows of the Richmond office, each drop a metronome to the silence between us. Ethan sat opposite me, jaw-set fingers drumming against a stack of manila folders. The lawyer beside him smoothed his tie, then slid a neat bundle of papers across the table. "Release the contracts," Ethan said. His voice didn't sound like his own. It sounded borrowed polished to match the legal letterhead. The folder on my lap shifted as I pulled it closer. The clasp strained when I pressed it shut, a thin metallic complaint that seemed too loud for the room. "You've done more than enough?" The lawyer began, tone oily with rehearsed patience. "But continuing to hold these agreements well, it gives the impression of control." He leaned forward, tapping the corner of the papers. "And that's not what family events are meant to be about." I looked at Ethan, searching for the brother I'd pulled from scraped knees and late-night mistakes. What stared back was a reflection of someone else's script. "This isn't about control," I said quietly. The rain beat harder, echoing my pulse. "It is. To her," Ethan replied. "You keep the contracts in your name. You hold the payments." "She feels—" He faltered, then found the line. "She feels manipulated." The word sat between us like a weapon I hadn't known I'd built. My thumb traced the edge of my folder. The leather there had begun to fray tiny fibers, lifting like frazzled nerves. "Ethan," I said steady, "those contracts exist because I signed them, because no one else would. They're not chains. They're receipts." The lawyer coughed gently, a sound meant to close arguments rather than invite them. "Intentions aside, perception matters. If this ever comes into dispute, it will look like you engineered dependence." I let the words hang. Engineered dependence. I'd engineered supply lines through deserts and snowfields, not family obligation. Yet here I was, accused of turning generosity into leverage. My brother rubbed his temple, repeating phrases that weren't his. "She just wants to breathe. She says you're everywhere. In the invoices, in the florist emails, even in the DJ's deposit slip. She feels suffocated." I opened my folder halfway. Contracts stared back, ink smudged slightly from my fingerprint signatures, precise and unarguable. The clasp clicked again, loud, close to snapping. The lawyer's eyes flicked to it, perhaps noting how even paper could resist. "You want me erased?" I said finally. My voice was low, but the rain carried it. Not just from the table, from the record. Neither man answered. The lawyer adjusted his papers. Ethan folded his hands, silence doing the work words couldn't. I pressed the folder shut. The leather groaned, and I felt the edges give a warning of what was to come. My work. The receipts, the deposits. The careful coordination sat suddenly on the other side of the table, turned against me. The lawyer slid a pen toward me. Its tip gleamed under the fluorescent light. "It's best for everyone," he said. I didn't touch it. The ink on the top page blurred as a drop of rain streaked down the window, the reflection crossing the table like a line through my name. I held the folder tighter, breath measured. Silence again, heavier than protest, heavier than signing. The rain tapped harder, smearing itself into the glass, until it looked like the whole city was weeping over the contracts. The kitchen clock clicked past midnight, each second louder than the hum of the fridge. My table was no longer wood, it was paper. Contracts fanned across it, invoices spread like a battlefield map. The leather folder slumped half empty at the edge, its spine sagging as if relieved to let go of the weight. The coffee in my mug had gone cold hours ago, a dark mirror for the laptop glow pooling across the room. I rubbed my ink-stained fingers together, skin rough with hours of handling paper. The cursor blinked in the subject line of an email draft. Release scheduled. The words pulsed like a dare. I began feeding the scanner one page at a time. Receipts slid under the glass, the light bar sweeping across them like a slow inspection. Each beep landed in my chest. Names, dates, amounts, the ledger of everything I had provided. A florist invoice, a DJ contract, the venue deposit. My handwriting, my signature, my proof. When the stack thinned, I opened the files, arranging them in neat digital order. Evidence had always been my language. Now it was my defense. I clicked record on a memo app. My voice came out steadier than I expected, timestamp glowing in the corner. "This is Vaughn," I said. "These documents confirm payments made in my name. They confirm responsibility assumed." The words were simple, factual, but hearing them aloud made them heavier, carved deeper. The fridge motor shut off suddenly, leaving the room too quiet. My breathing filled the space. I scrolled through the folder now living on my desktop, each file named Clean Venue, PDF Caterer, PDF Florist, PDF. A story told in contracts rather than memory. The email window blinked at me again. Recipients were already typed. Ethan Lindsay, the lawyer, half the family, and a few others copied in. The attachment bar showed a list long enough to choke any doubt. I hovered over the button cursor, trembling once, then steadied. The folder on the table looked thinner than ever. Edges curled, emptied into the machine. The leather had borne its scars. Now the burden was mine. I pressed Schedule Send. The confirmation box appeared, timestamping tomorrow morning, 7:00 a.m. A moment no one could stop once set. I exhaled. The air felt cold, sharp, honest. "It's begun," I whispered to the empty kitchen. Outside, the February wind rattled the window panes. The laptop glow held steady, and for the first time, silence felt like action. The judge adjusted his glasses, eyes sweeping the room without resting anywhere. His voice was flat, procedural. "Do you have anything to add before we proceed?" The question wasn't really an invitation. It was punctuation, a way to remind me I was only here to be acknowledged in passing. I felt the disinfectant sting at the back of my nose, sharp and sterile, as if the air itself were trying to scrub me out. Folding chairs creaked under restless relatives. I kept my folder balanced across my knees. Its clasp had worn down to stubborn silence. No one wanted it opened. The judge had already labeled it irrelevant. Across the aisle, Lindsay leaned back with practiced ease. Her smirk was a curve meant for the audience, not me. Ethan, seated beside her, avoided my eyes. His hands clenched so tightly his knuckles glared white. The ceremony itself felt like a stripped-down rehearsal. No music, no flowers, only papers and pens. The judge shuffled forms that looked too thin to hold the weight of what they decided. I heard a cough echo in the chamber, then the faint whir of a phone camera focusing. A red light blinked from the third row. Someone was recording. My pulse measured itself against that tiny glow. The judge called out for signatures. The pens scraped loudly as names landed where they shouldn't have belonged. When my turn came, the lawyer raised a palm. "We won't be needing his file," he said. "All necessary documents have already been provided." The words carried like a verdict. Around me whispers rose quick and brittle. I could feel the weight of phones, rising screens angled to capture my reaction. The glare of one lens burned against my cheek. I sat still. Silence has a gravity of its own, and I let it pull me down, keep me steady. But to them it looked like defeat. Lindsay glanced at me once more, her smirk widening in the sterile light. She thought silence meant surrender. Ethan shifted in his chair but said nothing. General Davis, seated near the back, folded his arms, jaw-tight expression, unreadable. The judge cleared his throat. "Very well. Let's conclude." The shuffle of pages, the scrape of another chair, and the hum of disinfectant fans filled the pause. I glanced down at the folder on my knees. Its edges were worn corners curling from use. My thumb pressed against the spine, feeling the history inside it, proof ignored evidence sealed away. The whispers sharpened fragments breaking free. "Guess he gave up," someone muttered. Another voice. "Shouldn't have pushed so hard." Laughter, soft and mean, spread like static. The red light from that phone blinked brighter. Someone was still watching, still recording. Not everything was being erased. I drew a long breath. Silence may look like surrender, but silence can also be the pause before something shifts. The judge raised his hand for the final pronouncement. Behind him the flag drooped against its pole limp in the recycled air. I stayed seated, folder steady on my lap, while the room mistook my composure for collapse. Outside the tall windows, March rain blurred the city into streaks of gray. The red recording light glowed steadily, a witness I hadn't expected. General Davis rose so cleanly his chair barely whispered against the floor. "Are we just going to ignore this?" His voice cut through the chamber like a blade honed on ceremony, no louder than necessary, no softer than true. The room stilled. Disinfectant hung in the air, clinical and thin. A camera flash stuttered against the back wall. Folding chairs gave a nervous creak and sigh as people adjusted to attention. The judge's pen froze above a signature line. Beside him, the flag stirred in the vent's thin breath. "Your Honor," the general said, turning only his head. "Before you conclude, the record is missing facts." His gaze slid to me, not a rescue look, but a confirmation the way officers check a latch before a door takes pressure. Facts about who paid for tonight's celebration and who was asked to leave it. Murmurs rolled the length of the room. Lindsay's smile tightened until it was all teeth. Ethan's hands braided together on his knee knuckles blanched. From the third row, the red eye of a phone's record light glowed steady. Another handset rose, then another, small black flags declaring there would be witnesses wanted or not. The judge cleared his throat. "General Davis, this is a civil proceeding of limited scope." He tried for bland. He landed near brittle. "If you have something strictly factual, briefly will do," the general said. He nodded once at me. The instruction was simple: proceed. I stood. The bag at my feet yielded the folder I'd repaired the night before. Clasp, taped corners, reinforced spine, firm again under my palm. The tape edges were slightly rough. I felt their ridges like new scar tissue. I stepped forward and set the folder on the long table. Leather met wood with a flat, certain sound. Lindsay's eyes tracked the movement like a cat's. "We've already established that his paperwork is irrelevant," she said. Smile reinstalled. "We're concluding." The general didn't look at her. "Relevance changes when truth is missing," he said evenly. I opened the folder. The clasp gave a small tick and loosened obedient. Inside the pared-down stack was neat retainer confirmations, deposit receipts, vendor timelines, the venue agreement stamped paid in full. Copies, not the whole archive. Evidence, not drama. The room inhaled as one when the notary stamp flashed red under the fluorescent light. "Venue deposit," I said, sliding the first page across so the judge could see the date in the upper right. "Caterer retainer. Florist, rentals, DJ." My voice surprised me, flat, steady. the tone I save for inventories that need no adjectives. All paid from my account, signed by me because no one else would sign. Phones craned forward. On a screen near the aisle, a live stream banner bloomed Live City Hall, and comments began to sprint up the side. Wait, what? Is this the brother? Whoa, receipts. The red count at the top ticked upward faster than breath. Across the aisle, Ethan's mouth opened, then closed. Lindsay's smirk fractured hairline fine at first. She reached for his arm. He didn't notice. The judge took the pages without meeting my eyes. He read like a man counting down a fuse. These appear properly documented, he said, each word chosen for dryness. He set them down square to the edge of the table, as if alignment could make them smaller. Facts, the general said, not asking. And while we're establishing the record Mr. Mercer served under my command, he made hard calls without noise and held his line when others wavered. He turned from the judge to the room. You may not like what that looks like at your dinner table, but some of you are sitting on his steadiness right now and calling it your own. A hush formed dense as velvet. Somewhere a chair squeaked in protest. The disinfectant smell thinned under the warm human breath of a crowd deciding whether it had misread the scene. I slid one more sheet to the top, a screenshot printed from the scheduler timestamp for the morning, already passed. Release completed 0700. The notification banner captured in the image looked almost cheerful. This was sent, I said, so no one would have to take my word. On the live stream screen, the comments fell into brief alignment receipts, timestamp. He paid. The viewer count jumped again triple digits to 4, 4 to 5. Lindsay found her footing in denial. You're making a spectacle, she hissed low enough for the first 2 rows and every recording device. This is pathetic. No, the general said, still not looking at her. He faced me, and because he understood the weight of gestures, he lifted his right hand to the level of his brow. The salute was crisp, economical, perfect. This is acknowledgement. The room didn't breathe. Even the judge stopped pretending not to feel it. A few relatives stood without knowing why. Others lowered their phones an inch, then raised them again, compelled to frame ceremony when it finally appeared. I didn't return the salute. You don't in a place like this, not in uniform you're not wearing. I let it land. The meaning did the rest. Let that stand, the general said, dropping his hand. On the record. It was not an award, not a medal, not a speech. It was smaller and heavier, a public hinge turning the sound of a narrative being corrected in real time. You could hear the crowd register it, the faint exhale, the rearranging of faces. The judge looked down at the documents again and nodded once, self to self. The record will reflect the submitted materials. His voice acquired a spine. And the court recognizes Mr. Mercer's contributions as established. The gavel didn't fall. This wasn't that kind of hearing, but something in the room did. My fingers found the folder's repaired clasp. I pressed it closed. The snap rang like punctuation, not ending so much as clarity. Phones caught the sound. A dozen tiny mics gulped it down. Are we finished? Lindsay asked, brittle. Her smile had migrated into a grim line that didn't suit her. On the live stream screen, a comment read, Bride owes brother an apology. Another, this is hard to watch. The viewer count rolled again 5 digits now. A thumbnail in the chat showed a local news logo sliding into the feed. Ethan's shoulders sagged. He looked at me the way a man examines a compass he'd insisted was broken, then realizes it wasn't. His throat worked around a word he didn't release. Tremor traveled from his hands to his jaw. Someone near the back started clapping one of those awkward single-person applauses that either dies or detonates. It detonated. Not loud, but enough. The sound ricocheted off the sterile walls and made them feel for a second like someplace that had windows open to air. The judge lifted a palm to calm it. "Formality is jealous." He said the necessary concluding phrase, and people began to stand their chatter bright and off balance. The livestream banner's red light kept burning steady as a small star as the comment flood climbed from curiosity to opinion to judgment. I gathered the folder. Tape caught against my sleeve and then released a brief tug like a reminder brake meant hold. When I looked up, cameras were still trained, spectators still narrating, and the room so sure of its story an hour ago was now rearranging itself around a new center of gravity. At the edge of my vision, Lindsay's composure cracked wide enough to show something raw. Ethan trembled beside her, finally feeling the weight of everything he hadn't said. On the nearest phone, the viewer counter flipped again, numbers accelerating as if a tide had found the moon. The caption updated itself without anyone touching the screen. City Hall clip, General stands up, family drama receipts. Notifications began to ping in pockets up and down the rows, little bells announcing that the moment had slipped the room's leash. The red light burned brighter. Cherry blossoms drifted like slow snow along the river walk, catching on the bench slats and the toes of my shoes. Ethan stood a few feet away, hands buried in his pockets, as if the wind were inside him. When he finally looked up, his voice shook in a way I hadn't heard since we were boys. "I chose silence," he said. It broke us both. The breeze off the James carried cool water and mulch, a clean smell that made everything in me feel worn and old. I didn't answer. Words were a currency I didn't trust yet. He swallowed, eyes fixed somewhere over my shoulder. I told myself I was keeping peace, he went on, but I knew what Lindsay was doing. I let her. I let you carry the weight, then acted like it wasn't heavy. A cyclist rolled by, tires whispering over grit. Pedals lifted and settled. Ethan's shoes scuffed at the edge of a chalked hopscotch someone had left near the path. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said. "I'm asking you to see. I finally see it." He gave a helpless laugh. "That probably doesn't help." It did, and it didn't. The admission made a dent where anger had ossified, but dents aren't doors. I rubbed my thumb along the edge of my pocket and felt the dog tag there, cool metal, teasing warmth from my skin. "I hear you," I said. It was the truest sentence I had. "I hear you." He nodded like a man accepting half a ration. "Lindsay's gone to ground," he added. "She's regrouping." The word sounded like something he'd borrowed from me. "I don't know what happens next." "Next doesn't have to be loud," I said. "It just has to be honest." He winced, then nodded again, more to himself than to me. When he finally stepped back, he looked smaller and somehow clearer. "I'll make it right where I can," he said. "Even if that's not with you." He left with his shoulders slightly squared, as if truth had weight, but at least it balanced. I sat alone long enough to feel the bench print its slats into the back of my legs. The river moved in its broad, indifferent way, throwing light like coins it didn't plan to spend. A A few petals stuck to my sleeve and softened there. "Nice salute," Julia said from behind me, voice easy. She came around and took the other end of the bench without asking the way people do who have already earned their permission. She smelled like coffee and cold air. The chain of her own tag flashed briefly at her throat, a small familiar glint. "I didn't return it," I said. "Not the point," she answered. "He put weight where it belonged. The rest is just choreography." She studied my face. "How's your breathing even?" It surprised me to realize it was true. We let the river fill a minute. Boat wake lapped the rocks, soft applause. Somewhere up the path, a kid shouted triumph at a kite that finally caught wind. Julia dug a hand into her jacket and then paused, reconsidered, and withdrew it, empty. "Say it out loud," she said. "What hurts and what doesn't." I touched the pocket again. The tag had warmed enough to feel like part of me. "Being erased," I said. "Watching them enjoy what I built, then call me a problem for standing near it." I flicked a petal off my cuff. "And the part where I trained for silence so well I mistook it for safety." "Silence keeps you alive," she said. "Voice builds the bridge after." She bumped my shoulder lightly with hers. "You did both this week." "That's not nothing." I pulled the dog tag out and laid it on my palm. Letters caught light in their stamped grooves. "I should give this back," I said. "It's yours." Julia shook her head. "It's ours. That's the point." She pinched the chain cool against my wrist and folded my fingers over the tag. "Keep it. Walk with it until you don't need to look at it to know it's there." A long silence followed the good kind. Wind flipped the corners of a park map tacked to a post. The paper clucked softly. I thought of the folder, its tape edges, the way the clasp had learned to hold after breaking. Some things don't return to what they were. Some things shouldn't. "Ethan came clean," Julia said, not a question. "He did." I watched two petals spiral down together and land apart. It doesn't fix the record, but it fixes the story he tells himself. I exhaled. That might be enough. "Enough for now," she said. "Not the same thing." I laughed once, a sound that felt like a door unsticking. "You're impossible." "Accurate," she said, and grinned. We sat that way until the sun pulled a brighter line along the river. I waited for anger to surge again, for the old reflex to scan for threats, for a plan. Instead, there was just the bench, the river her sleeve brushing mine when a stronger breeze leaned across us. The ache in my chest loosened, not gone, but no longer in charge. "I keep thinking I should have spoken sooner," I said. "At the dinner, at the rehearsal, years ago. You spoke when it mattered," she said, "and you made sure the truth would outlive the room." She tipped her head toward the water. "Now you decide what you build with the quiet you've bought." The words touched something tender. The tag cooled as the wind shifted, then warmed again against my palm. I closed my eyes and let my shoulders drop a notch. "I forgive him," I said, surprised to hear the sentence arrive whole. "But I think I have to forgive myself first." "There you go," Julia murmured. It didn't feel like a proclamation. It felt like a weight set down where it wouldn't roll back onto my feet. My throat tightened and then cleared. I pressed the tag to my chest, held it there until the metal took body heat and disappeared into it. A barge pushed upriver steady, indifferent to the small dramas on its banks. I watched it pass and made a choice that didn't require an audience, not revenge, not retreat, just the work of mending what could be mended and leaving the rest to the current. Julia rose and faced me, so she asked, the hint of a smile pulling at one corner, "What will you build now?" The wind moved blossoms between us, like pale, slow confetti. I didn't answer yet. I wanted the question to sit where it'd do the most good. "Welcome, everyone," I said, and for once the words didn't catch in my throat. The small circle of veterans shifted in their chairs, cups in hand, the scrape of metal legs against linoleum giving the room a rhythm. Sunlight slanted through tall windows, warming the varnished floor. The smell of coffee from the old urn cut through the morning haze, earthy and reliable. Julia stood near the side wall, arms folded, her presence as steady as always. Behind her, pinned banners from past fundraisers hung slightly faded but proud. I caught her eye. She gave a slight nod, the kind she'd given in mess halls before hard nights. On the shelf near the registration table sat the old leather folder, now empty clasp still taped. A relic. It didn't hold evidence anymore. It held memory, a reminder of what silence can cost and what truth can change. I let my gaze rest there only a second before I turned back to the circle. "This workshop," I said, "is about more than budgets and balance sheets." A few heads tilted forward, attentive. Silence taught me resilience. But sharing knowledge stories, mistakes that build strength. I clicked the laptop, and a simple slide flickered onto the wall, financial literacy and logistics for veterans. Not fancy, but clear. The kind of clarity I'd spent years chasing. I walked them through the basics, how to read a 401k statement, how to negotiate a contractor invoice, how to spot fees hidden in fine print. My voice found an easy cadence practiced not in classrooms, but in motor pools and quartermaster tents. Hands went up. A woman in her 40s asked about late fees on a mortgage deferment. A man with salt-streaked hair wanted to know how to challenge an insurance claim. I answered with the calm of someone who had once juggled convoys and spreadsheets while rockets painted the horizon. Their nods told me it landed. Applause came not polite but genuine, filling the hall with warmth that no chandelier had ever given me. I felt my chest loosen, a slow exhale that carried years with it. At the back near the door, Ethan stood. Not part of the circle, not ready for it, but present. His hands were in his pockets again, but his eyes were up. He didn't try to speak. He didn't need to. Recognition lived in the set of his jaw, in the way he stayed until the clapping faded. Julia stepped forward and clapped me on the back. "Not bad for a quiet man," she murmured. I grinned small, but real. The veterans pushed chairs closer, already trading questions, stories, half smiles. The scrape of legs against the floor echoed like new beginnings. Outside, summer heat pressed against the glass, but inside the air was light, easy. I looked at them, faces marked by years, by service, by silence, and felt something settle. My worth wasn't waiting for a seat at someone else's table. It was here, in the work in the circle, in the possibility of restoring what had been overlooked. "Remember this," I said, closing my notes. "What we restore in each other becomes lasting." The room quieted for half a beat, then the applause rose again, louder this time, brighter. Sunlight shifted across the floorboards, warm against my shoes. and for the first time in years, I felt not erased, not tolerated, restored. The faint clink of cups and plates carried farther than any applause I had ever known. I turned the pocket watch in my hand, its repaired glass smooth and cool against my thumb, the tick steady again after nearly breaking. Justice had been done, but what mattered more was choosing to live forward with dignity, with sharing. Losing a job, a marriage, or even a family bond can hollow you out, yet there is always room to rebuild from the smallest acts. On the bulletin board, a veterans newsletter thanked us for launching the first workshop. I wonder what will you choose to restore in your own community,